Dakota's 2022 congressional debate. Today's debate for North Dakota's lone congressional seat in the U.S. House of Representatives is between Republican incumbent Kelly Armstrong and independent challenger Cara. I'm Amy Eiler, and on behalf of everyone at KFGO, thank you, first of all, to the candidates for being here. We appreciate it. And thank you as well to our live audience here at the Anishinaabe Theater at NDSU's Memorial Union, and those watching our stream at KFGO.com, and of course, listening live at KFGO on 790 AM, 94.1 and 104.7 FM. Today's debate will be 90 minutes with 2 breaks. Prior to today's debate, our listeners were encouraged to submit questions at KFGO.com, and our panel will be asking the questions and have taken all submitted questions into consideration. Our panel is packed with veteran newsmen here. Here with us today from our KFGO News team are veteran news director Paul Juergens, our longtime news reporter Don Haney, and from Prairie Public News director Dave Thompson. Before today's debate, we flipped a coin, and that determined today's opening and closing statements. Congressman Kelly Armstrong will begin opening and closing statements today. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening statements, 2 minutes to answer the questions, and 2 minutes for closing statements. There will be an opportunity for brief rebuttal should a candidate feel compelled to respond. I will be timing your answers today and will give you a 30 mark, and then I will raise my hand when your time is up. I should remind our in-house audience to keep applause to a minimum. After all, applause just cuts into your candidate's time today. Again, thanks for being here. We'll start things off with a 2-minute opening statement with Congressman Kelly Armstrong.
Thanks to KFGO for hosting the debate. Thanks for NDSU for allowing us to use this facility. Good luck this weekend in your football game. It helps me with my friend and colleague from South Dakota if you manage to come out ahead, so that would be great. One of the greatest things that amazes me and I'm so proud to do is the best part about this job is going from one end of the state to the other when we're back in district. And the thing that is always so fun and so great to see is how proud people are of what they do in North Dakota. It doesn't matter if you're in Fargo or Fessenden. We're proud of our communities. We're proud of our sports teams. We're proud of our family. We're proud of our friends, and we're proud of the fact that we feed and fuel the world. We do droughts well. We do blizzards well. We do hail well. We do storms well. We have late harvest. We have all of these different issues, and we come together as a state, come together as producers, come together as all of those different things, and we manage to help each other out and get through them. The biggest single problem we have is that far too many people that affect the daily lives of North Dakotans think gas comes from the gas station, food comes from the grocery store, and electricity comes from the light socket. It doesn't matter whether they're trying to shut down coal-fired electricity in the central part of the state. It doesn't matter if they're making it nearly impossible to get pipe in the ground to export our tremendous resources from the western part of the state. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about waters of the United States or we have a farmer in the Red River Valley who can't farm a quarter acre of their wetland because of federal regulations. We need to continue to fight for these things. And by the way, it doesn't make the people making these decisions evil, and it doesn't make them stupid. It means they have a worldview that doesn't work for North Dakota. So we go to DC every day to talk about that because we're proud of feeding and fuel the world. We produce a lot of things that the rest of the country and the rest of the world needs, and it's been the greatest privilege of my life to represent North Dakota and fight for those things. Thank you.
Good afternoon, North Dakotans. My name is Cara, and I'm an independent candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives. I want to thank KFGO and NDSU for having us here today. But as I stated, I am an independent candidate. I'm not running as a Republican, and I'm not running as a Democrat. I'm also the only candidate in this race who is not bought and paid for by a political party or a pact. I was born and raised in Bismarck. My love for North Dakota grows deep. I then went on to Brown University, where I graduated with honors and a degree in business, entrepreneurship, and organizations. After my time at Brown, I went on and worked for Senator John Hoeven in D.C. I then became Miss North Dakota and made history for the state of North Dakota when I became Miss America 2018. In that role, I served as the National Goodwill Ambassador for the Children's Miracle Network hospitals as I went in and out of hospitals across America. I served as a liaison for the USO, supporting our troops both domestic and abroad. But I didn't want that to be my peak. I then went on to Harvard Law School, where I graduated with honors again, and have recently passed the bar and am now an attorney in the state of North Dakota. But what I can tell you is that as the daughter of a public school employee, I will support education, I will support teachers, and I will support mental health in our schools. As the niece of a diabetic, I will support affordable prescription drugs. As the granddaughter of two brave soldiers, I will support our veterans and their health care. As the cousin of a North Dakota farmer, I will prioritize the 2023 Farm Bill. As an attorney, I will uphold the law, the rule of law, and also our democracy. As a woman, I will fight for equality, restoring women's rights, and limited government. That means out of your bedroom and out of your doctor's appointments. And as an independent, I will ensure North Dakotans have a leader who actually represents them.
As the news director at KFGO, candidate Mund, the overturning of Roe v. Wade essentially prompted you to get into this race, prior disclosure, and since then there's been some talk from Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina vowing to push legislation that would ban all abortions, with some exceptions, I believe, after 15 weeks. The chances would appear slim, but we didn't think a year ago we'd be talking about abortion in this debate. If you were to be elected to Congress, what would you do to ensure that abortion rights are maintained, at least in some states?
Yeah. I want to make one clarification that the overturning of Roe was the reason why I eventually came into the race, but I've been watching the incumbent's voting record for quite some time and don't think it represents North Dakotans. Overturning of Roe, we knew that this was a vulnerable decision, which is why we asked the Supreme Court justices under oath when they were going through the nomination process whether or not they would uphold it, and they said that they would. When the opportunity came to take the rights of women and to now treat them like second-class citizens, they took it. But I want you to look back at what the Roe decision's about. It's about your right to privacy. It's about the government staying out of those places that they shouldn't be. Lindsey Graham has now stated that there will be this 15-week ban that they're trying to propose. I expect the incumbent to say that this should be a right that goes back to the states. Well, the Republican Party has now completely contradicted themselves when they want to now have a ban at 15 weeks. You're just showing the true colors, and that this isn't about, preventing or to helping pro-life efforts. It's about control. I also want to make it very clear that just because you are pro-choice does not mean that you don't value human life. It means that it's a place the government should not be. I also want to highlight that this is the third debate I have been on, and I am once again the only woman in this room that is part of this conversation. I am representing 20%, which is less than what women represent in the House, and we're still not at equal representation. So if elected to the U.S. House, I will work to codify Roe to ensure that my children and my grandchildren have the same rights that I had when I grew up. I'm also of childbearing age, and I know what it's like for a woman to go in. These are not easy decisions for them. The trauma of a rape, of incest, of even the life of the mother. What does that mean? How do we enforce it? It's a decision that the government should not be a part of, and it should be something that should be codified at the pre-viability of the fetus.
Before I get to Congressman Armstrong, have you or do you expect to receive any financial support, campaign support from national abortion rights organizations?
Me? Represent me?
Yes.
No, I don't. And I'm not going to be taking any PACT money, and I've made that very clear. My funding is coming from individuals and individuals only, because I don't want to be bought and paid for by a party, political interest, or a PAC.
Representative Armstrong, abortion rights, certainly your position is well-known, anti-abortion position. Would you support this proposal from Senator Graham that's been talked about in recent weeks?
Yeah, I'm proud of my pro-life record. I served in the Senate Judiciary Committee, but let's be clear. First of all, no, and the reason is that we shouldn't federalize rape and incest. In order to do a ban, to do a 15-week ban that has rape, incest, life of the mother, you are taking definitions at a federal level that are best left to the states. The federal government has failed on this issue for over 50 years. Roe v. Wade created a 14th Amendment right that had never existed out of whole cloth. It didn't do anything to discern the arguments. It didn't do any of these things. It's time to let the states have it back. But I also think it's important to recognize that even under Senator Graham's bill, that would be essentially par for the course for all but 2 countries in Europe. This is not a radical position. Last September, when Democrats had the opportunity to codify Roe, that's not what they did. They passed a bill that would allow taxpayer-funded abortions from at any time until conception till birth. So when we continue to talk about these issues and politicize these issues at the federal level, we're doing a disservice to everybody. This should always have been with the states, as it was before Roe, and it's time to give the states a chance to redirect on this issue.
Can I respond? So first off, I agree the Democrats should have codified it, but there's not a Democrat up here, and I've said this time and time again. Additionally, you're talking about 14th Amendment right. This is at a time that women couldn't even vote, and individuals were still seen as property and not even as whole people. So, you know, when we have precedent for 50 plus years, I think you need to look at that and also how it reflects back on the Supreme Court. If we're going to be delegitimizing ourselves, and that's something that you're okay with, it also goes to upholding democracy.
The bottom line is women were allowed to vote in 1960s, and those are all those issues. The Constitution is the greatest living greatest document in the history of the world. And for all of its flaws and all of its partisan things, one of the things that exists is the ability to go there. It's Marbury v. Madison. It's the case that allows the U.S. Supreme Court to do these things. And I'll just tell you what an old trial lawyer told me one time when I was going up on an appeal on a case I thought I should have won and I lost. Doesn't matter if you agree with them, doesn't matter where you're at. They're not always right because you agree with their opinion. They're right because they're last. And that's the reality of where we're at. The federal government has failed on this issue. It's time to give it back to the states.
I also think it's important that women have their voice heard and that these rights that were given to them are not now taken away. It also goes to upholding our democracy and needing women more in these spaces. Again, I am the only woman who's part of this and who has a uterus, who will have to go through this, who's representing that voice.
I have an incredibly successful wife with 2 law degrees. I have a 14-year-old daughter. To say that I'm not allowed to weigh in on these positions because of this as the sole representative of North Dakota is not how our democracy works.
I'm not saying you're not allowed to weigh in on it, but I'm saying in 2014, North Dakotans spoke loud at 64%, stating we didn't want a personhood bill. And as a representative, you represent those individuals, not just Republicans, not just those who are part of the GOP, but our voices have been heard at 64%. And to take a stance that goes in opposition of that is not being a representative of
Yeah,
North
except
Dakota.
that's not what this decision did. Dobbs didn't create a personhood representation. That's not what it did. It sent it back to the states to allow them to do that. You're conflating 2 very different issues in order to score political points in a debate. Personhood and dealing with Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision as a 14th Amendment right to go back to the states. I'm a huge fan of states' rights. And by the way, this decision won't be overly popular with some on the right either, because there are people who are pushing for these issues. But I contend you have to support states' rights even when it's unpopular if you believe in limited federal government. And from everything I've seen in 4 years in D.C., I believe in a limited federal government.
You can believe in that limited federal government, but then when it comes to a woman, it's very different. And your website specifically states that healthcare decisions are between a patient and a doctor, but then it's different for women. And you could have had the opportunity. You voted against codifying Roe. You voted against contraceptives. Again, it can go back to the states, but it also can be our representative who votes to ensure that these rights are given back to women.
I voted against taxpayer-funded abortion at any time for any reason up until birth. By the way, if we're going to talk about what a radical position is, that is a radical position.
And now the labels. Here we go. We've what? It's been 10 minutes. We're calling radicals now. Again, we have
I said it's
to
a radical
stop this.
position. I believe it's a radical position.
A radical position for women to have rights?
To have an abortion for any reason 9 months into a pregnancy, yes, I believe that. And by the way, I believe most North Dakotans agree with that as well.
Okay, let me remind you, there's not a single clinic in the state of North Dakota that does elective abortions. This isn't about abortion, it's about women's health care. Not a single clinic does elective abortions. And so when you start criminalizing doctors, when you start telling doctors how they can treat their patients, that's something you're okay with?
The bill I voted on the floor of the U.S. House allowed for elective abortions with taxpayer expense, no exemption for religious beliefs from a religious hospital at any time from conception until birth. You're going to it wasn't codification of Roe. It's never been codification of Roe. By the way, When President Obama was president, they had 60 votes in the Senate and a majority in the House. You know why the Democrats couldn't codify Roe? Because they didn't think Roe went far enough. That's the reality of the situation. The federal government has failed. Let's get it back to the states to make their determination.
I've made it very clear that my position is on pre-viability of the fetus. So let me ask you.
So would you have voted for that bill?
Let me ask you, in the next
No,
term,
you accused me for voting no on it. Would you have voted for it?
I would have voted to codify Roe.
That's not the vote. The
Okay,
vote
so
wasn't to
let's say
codify Roe.
A vote comes up to codify Roe in the next term. How will you vote?
I will vote no. It goes back to the states.
It's very clear. Women's health care, women's rights are not a priority.
I think we've covered that topic, perhaps. Dave Thompson, my colleague with Public Radio at Bismarck.
All right, and we start with Representative Armstrong in this one. President Biden is still working on his student loan forgiveness package. Based on income guidelines and the type of loan, amounts of between $10,000 and $20,000 could be forgiven. Your thoughts on the proposal?
I absolutely oppose it. I oppose it as an executive order. I think it's unique to North Dakota because anybody who was smart enough to consolidate their loans with the state bank in the last decade is not going to be able to take advantage of it. But less than 60 or more than 60% of this loan buyback goes to the top 40% of income earners. Less than 20% goes to the bottom 40%. The reality of the situation is you are taking the lower income earners and paying off student loan for the higher income earners. It's a redistribution of wealth. It's outside its scope, and I was glad to see a small business organization filed suit yesterday. And oh, by the way, it's going to cost billions of dollars to the deficit at a time when we're running through record inflation.
So, Cara, having graduated from Harvard Law, did you take out any student loans?
I did, but I don't qualify. But that doesn't mean that that's the reason why I disagree with this position.
So you support the president's proposal?
I don't support the president's proposal. And you can now look, all this is public information, just like the PPP loans were as well. But no, I don't support the decision. I think it's just a Band-Aid for a much bigger issue, and that we have to address the cost of higher education. We have to address these student loans. These are predatory loans. So we need to make it very clear that, taking a step at a time. So one thing we could do is potentially not starting interest rates while the student is still in school, having it after, which is how it used to be. But also Marco Rubio, Republican, had brought in a bill, the Loan Act, and it talked a lot about how we wouldn't need interest rates. Instead, you could have a fee at the beginning. So again, there's a lot of really great solutions. I think, a $10,000, $20,000 forgiveness is not the right decision. But I also recognize that there are numerous North Dakotans who benefit from this. And again, if you can go to college and get on your feet right away, not be paying off the continued interest rates, it's a step in the right direction, but it's also just a Band-Aid.
My name is Don Haney. Representative Armstrong, obviously whenever there's campaigns underway, obviously there is finance reports. And as we understand it, according to one of the most recent campaign finance reports we have read, raised at least $1.4 million. And I guess the question is how much of that money would come from North Dakotans? Are you able to...
I raised a lot of money from individual North Dakota donors. I raised money from employee PACs. I raised money all across the spectrum, whether it's car dealers, agriculture, oil and gas, all of those different issues. But literally, I have no idea.
No percentage or anything at this point?
I don't.
How about...
Can I pop in? I have reviewed his FEC filings. So of the 1.4 million, 1 million is from PACs. That's 571 PACs. And so again, keeping in mind, who is he representing? Is it the people of North Dakota, or is it large corporations? Again, this is all open secrets. You can go view those filings, as well as his personal disclosures.
the question...
First of all, those are employee PACs from companies like Microsoft, who have their second largest campus in North Dakota, or Basin Electric, or Continental Resources. All of those people employ and work and help to make North Dakota a better place. I'm proud of that. I continue to work hard. The vast majority of the money you raise at $20 online is about how many caps letters you can put or double exclamation points, who to tell people to be mad at and why they should be mad at them. I work towards good policy, and I'm proud of the fact that we have a good fundraising record.
Of 571 PACs, they're all not North Dakotans, and you can go through and view it yourself.
Do you have any idea how much you might spend between now and the election day, November?
Don't know how much I'll spend now until election day, but from about 45 days out, it'll be roughly just under $1 million, I think.
Cara, your question, you've raised a lot less, obviously. I think the last number we heard was about 20,000 thus far. How do you build your name recognition and to get your message across to voters when I guess sometimes you don't have the ability to purchase radio, TV, various things? Can you explain that?
Yeah.
How you've been doing it?
Yeah, I'm fortunate that I am taking all from individual donors. So yes, he will outspend me. He can also personally finance his own campaign. I can't, which also just shows why I'm in this race, that I'm doing it for the right reason. That $20,000 was reported 2 weeks after when I had given that number. So my next filing should be about $70,000, and there's even more coming in. So I encourage North Dakotans, if I'm the candidate who gives you a voice, to continue to donate, because it's a hard effort. It would have been a lot easier to go with a party. It would have been a lot easier to take that PAC money. But the easy road is not always the honorable road. And to make sure that I am an independent voice for North Dakotans is my top priority.
Do you believe that perhaps it was your decision on the abortion situation that brought out more? Is it just the fact that you are closer to the election, more people have identified with you?
I think North Dakotans are tired. They're tired of the status quo. They value human rights, equality. They value upholding our democracy. They value affordable prescription drugs. I am not a one-issue candidate, and the media can paint me as that as much as they want because it makes it a lot easier to go against me. But the truth is, look at his voting record. Does it represent North Dakotans? Voting against veterans, voting against infants, voting against mothers, voting against the elderly. That's what resonates with North Dakotans, and making sure that they have a voice who's not going to just vote for the party or a pact, but is going to be their voice in Washington as their sole representative.
You know, I would ask specifically, I'll just pick one. Specifically, what did you like about that elderly bill? Specifically, what did you like about it? It was a bill that was introduced into Congress, and I'm specific. I mean, the better the title, usually the worse the bill is. But specifically, what was in that bill that made you think it was good for North Dakotans?
Yeah, I mean, the bad acts, right, of people taking advantage of our elderly individuals. AARP has said that the biggest issue, they did a poll, and I know you got this information because I got this information, the biggest issue facing those 50 plus is scams, is people taking advantage of them. And so this bill would help ensure that our elderly aren't being taken advantage of. But let's look at the PACT Act as well, Representative Armstrong.
Well, hold on, we can do that too, but that's not what the bill did. I mean, that's just not what the elderly bill did. 10 years
Tell
ago,
me what the bill did.
10 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that instead of being part of the thing, that age abuse had to be decisive. In the last 10 years since that decision has come out, there has been no marginal increase or decrease. The same number of elderly complaints are filed on a yearly basis as were prior to that. What this bill did was make it mixed motive. This wasn't a bill to help protect the elderly. This was a bill to protect trial lawyers and to hurt businesses and to do those things by allowing for more frivolous lawsuits in a place that didn't need the extra effort. And so, yeah, I'm going to protect North Dakota small business from bills that actually help trial lawyers and don't actually do anything to solve the problem, and I'll continue to do that.
Is that why you also voted against the Women's Pregnancy Fairness Act?
Well, that bill, I'm assuming we're talking about the same bill. I don't know the names of it, but that bill allowed for non-FDA contraception drugs to come onto the market. It took away religious exemptions.
No, this bill prevented discrimination of pregnant women in the workplace. So if you're going to be supporting the small businesses, what about the people as well? I think you can do both. But when you're talking about now forced births, and you're going to vote against discrimination of pregnant women in the workplace.
I've actually represented people who have been discriminated against from being pregnant in the workplace.
So is it that it brings in more money? Is that it? Is that why you want them to be discriminated against?
No, it's not particularly that. We had without getting into the details, we were allowed to we had a well done case in North Dakota and got relief for our client. So
well, there shouldn't be cases. Women shouldn't be discriminated in the workplace.
Let's, if we may go to a state issue. Here's a pretty simple question. Measure 2 on the North Dakota ballot, recreational marijuana. Congressman Armstrong, how will you vote?
I don't know yet. I honestly don't. I've been an advocate for criminal justice reform my entire life. I actually support what the president did on misdemeanor pardons, particularly. I think it's mostly symbolic. You're talking about...
Yes, there are very few
you're
federal...
talking about... Federal government doesn't prosecute misdemeanors.
Not really,
but I
no.
also have a 14-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son. And as THC contents continue to get higher and higher, we have to start looking at this. And one of the biggest mistakes the federal government has made on marijuana is because it's treated as a Schedule I narcotic, we've done no research on it. And so we have all of these different issues and working forward. But I mean, I'm not punting. I have mixed views on this. I've liked what the North Dakota legislature has done when I'm here to decriminalize it. I think I've been working on a bill in Congress for 2 years now, trying to get the language right and work forward that we don't enhance federal penalties for state-level misdemeanor marijuana convictions. I think there's real places to work here, but I'm telling you, I'm torn as somebody who's been a criminal defense attorney in this state for 10 years and a parent of a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old.
You'll make up your mind before the election.
I will make up my mind. And one of the things I have to look at, which I haven't looked at very closely, is in Oregon, when they legalized marijuana, they actually increased more illegal marijuana grows because of the regulatory regime and the tax regime that exist on it, that it still was beneficial to do it illegally and illicitly in a lot of rural areas and dealing with those issues. So how you do that is important. And it's actually had somewhat of a perverse incentive in a state like Oregon, because now that it's legal, there's not really as much motivation to go down and crack down on the illegal stuff. I know the people who wrote it, they're smart. They learned from the mistakes of some of the last ones. I think it's narrowly tailored. I think it gives community. I mean, I don't want to walk into a restaurant where 5 people are smoking outside. I just don't. I've been in downtown DC. I've been in downtown Denver. But the reality of the situation is between meth and opioids and fentanyl and all of those things that are really, really devastating to everybody in communities all across the country. Arresting a college kid coming back from Boulder with a joint in his car if he went skiing is not necessarily the primary use of resources of law enforcement.
Candidate Mund, your thoughts on Measure 2?
Yeah, I'm also unsure how I would vote. I support President Biden's decision as well, but I do think it's important that this is something that the voters can be heard on, and it'll be interesting to see what the result is. I see it just like the 2014 personhood. It gives North Dakotans a voice that they feel like they haven't had, and so based on that decision, based on what the statistics say, what that percentage is, I will then take that with me to DC so that I can be an accurate representation of the people.
This question first to Cara Mund. North Dakota has vast fossil fuel reserves in the form of oil, natural gas, and coal. The Biden administration is pushing several climate change proposals, and the auto industry is on board now with a growing line of electric vehicle offerings. It's 352 miles from Fargo to Beach. With a lack of charging stations so far, would you get an electric car and drive that distance in the dead of winter?
Your question just shows how this isn't feasible in North Dakota. To go across the entire state in an electric vehicle in the dead of winter, we don't have enough charging stations. But I will say climate change does exist. There's evidence of it. But we're also not at a point that we can not rely on oil and coal and what fuels North Dakotans. So I would not be getting an electric car, but I also, when you come to Washington, you need to be willing to negotiate. And the Inflation Reduction Act had some climate change policies in it, as well as the infrastructure bill. Both of these are bills that Representative Armstrong voted against. And so we can take small steps to protect our earth, to make sure that we're giving North Dakotans more opportunities to continue to grow, prosper our economy, help give to our legacy fund as well. It's great for North Dakotans, but electric cars for me, my personal decision, I'm not there yet. Also, I can't buy a new car yet. I'm still paying off my student loans.
For Representative Armstrong, according to your campaign commercial, you put on 80,000 miles in the past year?
It's probably more, but you always want to err under.
Yes. So are we moving too quickly in converting to electric vehicles?
Yeah, and we have the models to do it. We have California right now, the day that they say they're going to do electric vehicles by 2035, the next day they ask them not to plug it in. But more importantly, you can look at Europe. You can look at Germany right now. I mean, Germany right now is burning more coal than when they started their clean power plant. That is the truth. And the reality is they have the highest utility rates in the country. They're completely beholden to Vladimir Putin to get their energy. They decommissioned all their coal, decommissioned all their nuclear, and because when they were running all of these things. North Dakota's the solution to this, Dave, not the problem. We burn the cleanest, most efficient oil and gas, and we produce the cleanest, most efficient gas in the world. And from the time we left the Paris Climate Accords in 2017, which, by the way, would have been very devastating for North Dakota's coal and oil and gas industry, and which is something Cara has supported, we're the only country in the world that's lowered our emissions. The only one. And you know why? Because of the Bakken. Not because of shale in Texas, not because of shale in Wyoming, not because of offshore drilling in the Gulf, because of the Bakken. Because we developed this tremendous natural resource that allows us to create electricity cleaner and more efficiently. And the reality of all of these different issues at this point is the federal government is trying to take away all the mechanisms and economic impact of creating reliable baseload power and turn it into renewable energy. That just simply doesn't work. And the infrastructure bill is going to require that we have these charging stations from Fargo to Dickinson. And my hope is they put a 24/7 camera on it. Because if you want to see what your wasted federal tax dollars go to, stop at the charging station between Dickinson and Bismarck in February and watch how often that thing is used. The world's going to need more oil, more natural gas in 10 years. We're also going to have more electric vehicles in 10 years. Both of those things are fine. But when you're mandating that stuff in places like North Dakota, it makes absolutely no sense and it drives up inflation.
I have 3 points I'd like to respond. So first, the commercial with the 80,000 miles. Nothing says you support a former president who thinks he's above the law than distracted driving in your own campaign commercial. Second, my support for the Paris Accord. It was that Article 28 said that we couldn't leave for the 3 years after joining. And so the decision to pull out makes us look like, A, we're not reading what the guidelines are, that we're not going to uphold it, that again, we think that we're a nation that's better than what the rules are. So that's why I opposed it, despite whatever the incumbent has to say. And then I also want to go back to this charging station idea, and that this makes us now choose where we're going to put our charging stations. The infrastructure bill helps supports the 444 bridges in the state of North Dakota, the 830 miles of roadway that needs to be redone. On average, drivers pay $410 a year when roads aren't taken care of. On my drive up here today from Bismarck, it was road construction almost the entire way. And so how much of that is funded by the infrastructure bill? We need compromise. You're not going to get a bill that's entirely your way. You have to compromise. And so if voting down $2 billion that comes to support our infrastructure in the state of North Dakota, which brings jobs, which helps farmers, it helps our economy. If that's enough to vote down because you don't want charging locations dictated where they're going to go, you have to compromise. And our 2 Republican senators voted for it. Our representative voted against it. And it's exactly what Kevin McCarthy of the Republican Party wanted him to do.
That's absolutely not true. I voted against it because I thought it was bad for North Dakota. I sponsored the largest infrastructure bill in the history of the state of North Dakota when I was in the North Dakota Senate. There's nobody who likes construction cones more than a senator from western North Dakota in the middle of the oil boom. This bill spent $1.9 trillion that was unpaid for. By any economic analysis, if inflation runs above 7% over the next year, it takes away all of the increase in the highway funding bill. We don't have the workforce. We're running at the highest inflation rate in 40 years. And these projects, I know one project in North Dakota right now that went from 41 million to 57 million. They didn't change a single thing, not one thing. They didn't change a single thing, and the project has gone up. Inflation is the biggest short-term threat to our country and to our state. $31 trillion in debt is the largest, is the significant long-term threat to this country. $1 trillion seconds ago, woolly mammoths walked this earth. 1 trillion, not 31 trillion. We cannot continue to spend money that we don't have, and we are seeing the real world ramifications of that when you go fill your car, when you pay your utility bill, or when you go to the grocery station to buy food. That is the reality. I didn't vote against the bill for one particular reason. I voted against the bill for a lot of particular reasons, mostly because it was spending trillions of dollars. Since the end of the pandemic and the last partisan CARES Act bill, we have spent over $6.4 trillion at the federal level that is not paid for. If you want to see what's going on with inflation, you want to see what's going on your daily living, you want to know why you have had essentially 1 month's paycheck taken away from you with the most regressive tax in the world, we're it. 6.4 trillion. There's a reason nobody hates Santa Claus. I'm going to continue to vote against bills that aren't paid for because I think it's the single biggest threat that this country faces. And it's not for me, but it's for my kids and grandkids. And it's for everybody that's going to have to climb out of this.
And that's where we disagree. This bill was not bad for North Dakotans. It's exactly what Senator Kevin Kramer voted for. It's what Senator John Hoeven voted for. And so on that point, I agree with our Republican senators, and I disagree with you. Let's look at the stats. North Dakota receives a minimum allocation of $100 million to help provide broadband coverage to the 19,000 North Dakotans who need it. 159,000, or 21% of North Dakota, is eligible for affordable connectivity benefits. If giving $2 billion to the state of North Dakota to help fund our roads, our bridges, to provide connectivity, to help prevent so that people aren't driving on these unsafe roadways is bad policy for you, then that's where we disagree. Because I agree with the Republican senators on this issue.
I don't particularly think it's bad policy. I think it's incredibly terrible policy when it's not paid for.
So when you see the road construction, when farmers out there, you use those roads, you see that they're getting fixed, keep in mind that he voted against it.
Next, as they say, one would never have thought that this ended up in federal issues, but the federal government's reviewing the $700 million Fufeng milling plant project in Grand Forks. It's turned into a very controversial item. Environmental concerns have been raised, as have the company's Chinese ownership. That seems to be a big situation there. Is this project something you would support?
I think we need more information. I did come out vocally in my very first interview with KX News, Josh Meny, saying that I was concerned to put this, corn milling 12 miles away from the Grand Forks Air Force Base. This is the first location that they're choosing in the United States. It is a concern, and I don't believe Representative Armstrong has spoken out about it. Senator Kevin Kramer was actually the first one. I agreed with him. I said that this is a concern. We're hearing the voices of Grand Forks residents that are concerned. It is an issue of public safety. It's an issue of national security, and it's something that as a leader we need to be vocal on.
Well, I have spoke out about it. I don't think it's going to get built. When you're talking about the water issues or the energy issues or the environmental issues, those are local and state issues. My number one concern from the federal perspective is the national security implications of this.
And that does concern you, obviously.
Yeah, very much so, but I will tell you exactly where I am. There's a CFIUS review. GAO has done this. A lot of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have said this, but I've given the community of Grand Forks my word. I mean, if my number one concern is the national security issue, I'm going to wait for the national security report. I gave them my word that I would do that, and that's more important to me than scoring cheap political points on. And I'm not, and I don't mean that about you. I just don't. But there's a lot of that going on, and unfortunately, there are real concerns. But I've been very vocal that I don't think this thing can get built.
I do want to highlight that in an interview prior to when I announced, it was in August, Representative Armstrong was asked about the federal funding that was going to the project, and he didn't know about it. You can look that up again, KX News. So if we're going to talk about reduced spending, we should also know where federal funds are going, and that includes the Fufeng Group.
Speaking of significant projects, the Summit Carbon Solutions is proposing to extend a pipeline across the state bearing CO2 from 32 ethanol plants in 5 states. Safety concerns, eminent domain concerns among some of the landowners. There's Summit Carbon Solutions has an ad campaign going. There's an opposition group pointing out some of the concerns that it has. I'll direct this to Congressman Armstrong. What are your thoughts on that proposed pipeline?
I think carbon capture, North Dakota is one of 2 states that has primacy. Whatever you feel about all of these different issues, this is how we're going to continue to move forward. We know how to, we produce a lot of things here we don't consume. We're going to be able to do it. If they can sign up the landowners and get it there, then I'm completely comfortable with the project. North Dakota has pretty significant eminent domain laws. We ran into this when we were writing all the natural gas pipeline laws in western North Dakota. I support property owners' rights. I really do. There's some drain tile issues and some other things. There's some political issues about some groups down in Iowa or South Dakota that aren't willing to support it if any of it is used for enhanced oil recovery, all of those different things. But I think the project, if they can get it done with landowner consent, is a good idea. And I don't think, I am not comfortable with using eminent domain on private property. I'm just not.
Candidate Mund?
Yeah, for the most part, I agree with Representative Armstrong's stance on this issue. North Dakota can be a leader in carbon capture. So not only are we leading in ag issues, are we leading in energy issues, but also making sure that we help keep our earth clean. I also support property owners' rights. This issue of eminent domain, keep in mind which of your leaders spoke out about it when it came to the oil pipeline and which ones are speaking out about carbon capture. Again, this hypocrisy that's going on in our federal or in our state governments as well as the federal government. But if we can uphold property owners' rights, but also keeping in mind that we do want to be a leader in this industry.
We'll start with candidate Mund on this one. Millions of illegal immigrants have crossed the southern border, and thousands have been bused to other states by the governors of Texas and Florida. A, do we need stricter controls on the border? And B, what should Congress do to step in to solve this problem?
we need to secure our borders. Now more than ever, this is something that I really disagree on President Biden's decision and his policies. We need to secure our borders, but at the same time, the Republicans cannot be taking the lives of immigrants, of people who have come here to seek refuge. This narrative that they have that all immigrants are bad. It's bad for America, keeping in mind that all of our ancestors came here. Governor DeSantis's actions, they should be criminalized. It is fearful what he did as a leader, as someone who's potentially wanting to be a presidential candidate. And again, we have this party who will not stand up against their leaders, who will not, say that was bad decision, not only as a leader, but also as a person. And so our immigrants are, a foundation of our economy. Representative Armstrong had voted against giving immigration to our farm workers, their immigration status. Again, we need these individuals, especially when we're seeing the worker shortage right now. But we also need to treat them with respect, with dignity. So any bill that helps make it an easier pathway for citizenship so that we can secure our borders to go after the fentanyl crisis, of the fentanyl coming across the border, but at the same time also making sure that when people come here, they come here welcomed, that they have the opportunity to grow, to prosper, and to really have the American dream.
Congressman Armstrong, has the Congress punted the ball down the road?
Oh, I think historically this has been a really tough issue. I got a couple things here. One, 15 of my first 20 cases in federal court as a public defender were illegal reentry cases. Dealing with those issues and how we deal with this. I've dealt with this at a very human level. Secondly, when you're talking about the H-2A bill, I worked very closely with Jimmy Panetta, who's a Democrat from California, and Dan Newhouse, who's a Republican from Washington. Eventually, what ended up happening on that H-2A bill is it weighted far too much for dairy and not enough for local and things for that. And so, as with all things immigration, you are going to have to deal with it. But I wasn't comfortable voting for a bill that did way more for Pennsylvania and Washington, proportionally given the rate of it than the other side. But the reality is, Martha's Vineyard is not a tough hitch. It's not. It's not a tough hitch. And it got the White House to engage. You know what the White House didn't do? Engage when 55 migrants died in the back of a truck. Not once. Didn't say a word. This is inhumane for everybody involved. And when the Speaker of the House goes out and says we need them to help pick our crops, that's not particularly helpful either. But more importantly, we saw what the solution was. And I can tell you, as somebody who served under President Trump, I got a question from the national media every 48 hours on immigration when President Trump was president. Every 2 days. By any objective measure, it's significantly worse now. Significantly worse now. 2.3 million migrant encounters this year, an all-time record. Highest rate of fentanyl seized at ports of entry that we've ever seen. But you know what we're not seeing? Increases in meth, increases in heroin, increases in cocaine. And the reason is because it's not coming through ports of entry. When 600 migrants hit the facility in Eagle Pass, they take all their interdiction officers and take them over towards to help deal with the human catastrophe, and they should. If there's a 12-year-old there who hasn't had a glass of water in 2 days, I want to give her a blanket and a hug. We have to be a part of that. But don't think there aren't hundreds and hundreds of pounds of fentanyl coming across the border, making it right here to Fargo, North Dakota on the backside of that.
I guess I'm next. I guess.
Would be a good place to take a break.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure is. You said 150?
For our listening audience on KFGO 790 AM, 94.1 and 104.7 FM, we're going to take a brief break. It's going to be about 5 minutes long, and we'll come back for the last bit of the congressional debate here on KFGO.
Representative Kelly Armstrong and independent candidate Cara Mund on 790 KFGO 94.1 FM and 104.7 FM, also streaming on our social media channels. Paul Juergens, the news director at KFGO, with longtime KFGO reporter Don Haney and news director Dave Thompson with Prairie Public Broadcasting in North Dakota. And we'll have our next question come from Don Haney.
The question, and we'll start out with you, Cara Mund. It is the discussion of work that's underway for the new Farm Bill. It can be very complicated, very controversial, as it usually is, goes on forever sometimes it seems, but it has proposals to separate traditional programs from something very important, they all are, but the Title IV nutrition programs. We've heard a lot about that, whether you deal with agriculture or not. Should these be separate programs?
So I'm going to address the bill at large and then address your question. So with the Farm Bill of 2023, we are going through a very different circumstance than we were in 2018. Our farmers have experienced drought. We've gone through a pandemic, the trade war with China, the war in Ukraine. So there's important to first strengthen the safety net in three ways: reauthorize and reinforce parts of the 2018 bill that included commodity support programs, the federal crop insurance program, and permanent disaster assistance programs. The next thing that I would do would oppose cuts that could jeopardize the capability for the federal government and private insurance industries to deliver effective risk protection to our North Dakota farmers and ranchers. And the next thing I'll do is advocate for assistance for our family farms, for specialty crops, conservation, and rural development. I don't necessarily think that these should be separated, the title, like how you'd spoken about the nutrition programs, because it's typically part of all one farm bill. And again, we need to be willing to negotiate. We need to have those conversations at the table. And in 2018, they talked about how we needed these bipartisan effort. And I think now more than ever, when we see this political divide based on whether you have an R behind your name or a D behind your name, we need to keep that in mind when we have a leader, is whether or not they're going to negotiate this farm bill.
Congressman Armstrong, your take, and I guess...
Absolutely not, because I want the Farm Bill to pass. If you separate these out, you have more urban reps than you do rural reps outside of ideology. If you take these apart, you run real risk at programs that are absolutely essential to our agriculture, livestock community, and all of those different issues. This is always a traditional thing from conservatives, that they want to separate those things out. And I think anybody who's represented the state of North Dakota and can count to 218 or 60 understands you absolutely cannot do that, regardless of what your fundamental issues with how efficiently some of those other programs work. One thing we're working on, it's not new. First, make sure that the sugar fight is just like the last sugar fight, because it wasn't very big the last time, and traditionally that's been a huge issue. That's a huge issue in the Red River Valley. Secondly, we do really well actually at getting ad hoc disaster relief, which by that means we fight for it, we get it here, but it's still incredibly inefficient. Really inefficient. We have to continue to work towards titles that accurately reflect the growing season. We have dealt with all of those different issues. We need to make sure supplemental crop insurance exists. We need to make sure all of those different issues. If you've ever talked to anybody who's farmed in North Dakota, nobody's farming for crop insurance. Nobody. And we have to make sure that it exists both at the front end and the second year, because there's also, unfortunately, nothing saying in North Dakota that you can't have 2 bad years in a row. We also have to work towards getting rid of barriers to entry in the cattle industry, particularly in the stockyards, packers issues. Cool was a huge issue before USMCA. In fact, there were a lot of different issues in the 18 campaign. Cool has a better chance of passing under the current framework of our corn agreements, our ethanol agreements, and all of that. And then I think one thing that we have to have a longer conversation about is how we can increase refining capacity in general. Because that's how we get to renewable diesel, biofuels, ethanol, all of those different issues. We need to increase the value add. And we have great things going in North Dakota. We have Spiritwood, we have Castleton, we have a combination of east versus west, oil versus energy, but we're also seeing Trinidad and Morocco flooding the market with illegally subsidized fertilizer. And if you talk to anybody, their inputs are as big. Even though commodity prices are strong, their inputs are really tough, and we have to figure out a way to lower those burdens.
I would like to respond. So Representative Armstrong and I agree on a lot of things, at least in our talking points. But Representative Armstrong, I do want to highlight that you're a member of the Republican Study Committee, which has released their proposal for the 2023 Farm Bill. And in that, they describe it as a modest reform to crop insurance. But this includes deep cuts to commodity programs and to crop insurance. You talked about the sugar fight. They're actually wanting to phase out the sugar program and eliminate the milk program. Again, so this is the Republican study committee that you are a member of, and this is what they're bringing to the table of their ideas and their solutions.
Yeah, and I'll try and convince them they're wrong, and I don't support any of those things. It's the largest caucus, and there are a lot of things I agree with them on. I agree with them on Second Amendment rights. I agree with them actually on rights to privacy and dealing with 14th Amendment. It's a large, rambunctious caucus. They get to put out whatever they want, and I get to oppose it, what they put out when it's bad for North Dakota. And I will, not privately, vocally.
Have you released a statement opposing it?
No.
Exactly. So for our farmers, keep in mind that this is what the Republican Study Committee is bringing forward, who your representative is a member of, and he has not released any statement that he opposes the cuts to commodities, to crop insurance, eliminating the sugar program, the milk program.
I don't do press releases like that, but it's pretty easy to ask me where I stand on anything. Anybody who's in the media or anywhere else can call me and ask me. I don't turn any of it down. I've always been a vocal supporter. None of these are new positions because I'm running for my third term in Congress in 2022. I've been a pretty strong advocate of all of these things, both in my time in the state Senate and at the national level. So because a group that I am not in part of writing what they release, and they don't ask my opinion on it, this is not a new fight. This has always been a traditional fight. I've been very vocal on this issue. A lot of times our fight is with conservatives on these programs. Same thing with postal reform, which we managed to get through working very difficultly. I was the only Republican on oversight to actually sponsor the pre-pension bill for the United States Postal Service. I'm completely comfortable bucking my own party. And to say that I'm a yes man, it's a great talking point. The problem is it's just not true. And anybody who's ever worked with me or against me in the North Dakota legislature or in Congress knows that. I'm proud of the fact that I can work on both sides of the aisle, and I'm also proud of the fact that I'm a conservative, and I'm continuing to do those things. And I will work for what's best for North Dakota, and I don't care what the Republican Study Committee says.
Well, I will highlight he is a member, so I just want to correct that. You are a member of this committee. You're also mentioned in the report 4 times. So, you know, a statement maybe opposing what they're bringing forward because it hurts our North Dakota farmers and ranchers.
I'd like to weigh in on elections. Congressman Armstrong, you recently voted against a bill that seems to have tightened challenges to the Electoral College vote. Am I correct in that? And if so, why did you vote against it?
Well, the reason I voted against it, it allowed any presidential candidate to sue any state and extend an election by 4 years. The federal government determined what force majeure was. There's a bipartisan bill in the Senate that's working its way forward, and unfortunately we had the companion bill in the House, but that's not how it continued to work. They can't continue to decide and federalize these things. By the way, I've been pretty consistent that and have taken heat on both sides of the aisle for that. I was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee in North Dakota for 2 terms. We handled election law. I worked with my opponent in the first congressional race, Max Schneider, to rewrite our law after Citizens United to make it constitutional. I was also the chair of the Republican Party for 3 years in North Dakota, so I dealt with the political side of this. But the bill to reform the Electoral Count Act, as introduced in the House, was just simply takes too much federal power away from states and allows for any presidential candidate. It's in the bill. You can, by suing in a state, you can keep an election open for 4 days after Election Day.
So the bill that's coming over from the Senate is a better bill?
Yes, it's a better bill. It's significantly better bill. It deals with concepts, and it deals with the proper role of the federal government in elections. There are no federal elections. This isn't a federal election. This is a North Dakota election to elect a federal officer. And I'm very, very proud of that. North Dakota has the easiest ballot access in the country, And every single time we do this, I mean, we do these things and they federalize it, we actually make it harder to vote in North Dakota. And I know this because Cara has said she supports the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And I'm just wondering if she knows that it actually requires voter registration. Those bills, they may be good nationwide for different places, although I would argue the pre-clearance language is pretty significant and isn't actually adopting the existing one rather than expanding it in a draconian way. But when you represent North Dakota, those bills are really bad here. And I know this because every single time the Democrats introduce a federal election bill before it goes to the floor, you know where I'm at? The Rules Committee, asking for 1974 federal language that doesn't force us to go into voter registration. Every single time. And every single time, DC, Democrats and Republicans are shocked we don't have voter registration. But we have the easiest ballot access in the country. We have the easiest voter access in the country. But you know what else? Most North Dakotans want elections over on Election Day.
I would like to respond. I would have voted for it as it came before the House, and I can't help but think that now switching the position that agreeing with the Senate version is because Mitch McConnell has now approved that version. So again, it's as the bill comes to you, I would like to highlight that Representative Armstrong was at the Stop the Steal rally in 2021. If you go to Jeremy Turley's Twitter account, you'll see the speech that he gave. He agreed that the AP had called it, but he stated it is not over. He had the opportunity to be on the January 6th committee. He didn't do it. So it's no surprise that he has voted against this bill, but we need to uphold our election system because having fair, free elections is what upholds our democracy. And it's one of the top issues. NBC's done a poll that people are worried about the future of our democracy. And so keeping in mind that we need to be able to have accessible polls and getting people to the ballot box, but also that John Lewis bill was also about states that continue to discriminate against voters, and that impacts presidential elections. And so if you're going to go to a Stop the Steal rally and claim that it's not over yet, look at the video. Watch what he said. Is this upholding the democracy?
Yeah, I went to the rally. There were a lot of people there. There were a lot of people angry. I also voted to certify the election. I never signed on to the Texas lawsuit, and I've continually argued for that. And you can say whatever you want about the John Lewis Act and how it affects Mississippi or Alabama or Georgia. It doesn't matter because it makes it harder to vote in North Dakota. Harder, not easier, harder. That is the reality of what the bill does. And you can have this conceptual thing about where you're at. And I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican. If anybody from Pennsylvania is going to tell North Dakota what they're doing with their election results, I'm going to drive to Pennsylvania and we're going to have some words. And I've been pretty clear and consistent about that the entire time. We're really proud of how we do this here. We should keep it. It's definitely the most unique system in the state. I can tell you when I was the chair of Judiciary Committee and State Party Chairman, I had two different brains. Right? As the chair of the Judiciary Committee, you like this, you like all the access. As somebody who runs the political operation, voter registration sounds pretty nice. You get more data, you get more all of those things. And that's really, truly how that all works. But I always came down on the side of the fact that North Dakota is unique. We do it this way. And anytime the federal government tries to change election law, anytime I have ever seen, both Democrat and Republican, they actually forget that we are a unique space, and it makes it harder here.
Let me keep in mind that this was just reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But I also want to
That's also not true, but okay.
Okay. But I also want to highlight that a presidential election does impact North Dakotans. And so what happens in those other states, that president is their president, it's also our president. And we need leaders that are willing to uphold democracy, that are willing to seek truth, accountability, and who are not going to be going to Stop the Steal rallies trying to overturn the government, especially after we now have had an insurrection.
If that gives the federal government more control over North Dakota elections, you can count me out.
A recent poll, at least one of the most recent we have seen, showed that you, Cara Mund, were only trailing Representative Armstrong by a very short percentage point, I think about 4 percentage points, while a poll conducted for the congressman suggested more than 20% lead for him. How close do you believe this race is at this point?
Yeah, I'd like to highlight that I never conducted these polls. We talked about campaign finances. I don't even have enough money to fund a poll, to be wasting it in that sense. I think when people are going to be vocal, they're going to be vocal at the ballot box. I do think that there is a large silent majority. And so if what I'm saying resonates with you, you don't need to be vocal. You don't need to answer these polls. I've also heard that the polls that Representative Armstrong, their team pushed out, some of the questions were that I want to ruin our economy because I agreed with the Paris Accord. Another one of the questions was something along the lines of I wanting to take away all of your guns. These are just factually false, and they're push polls. And so, at the end of the day, the voice of North Dakotans is going to be heard on November 8th. And you don't necessarily have to make it vocal in public. You don't have to respond to these polls. You'll respond in who you elect as your leader.
Congressman?
Yeah, I do polls to make sure I know where we're at. I don't do them to make myself feel better. Anybody who does is wasting their money. But the only poll that matters is November 8th. I'm an ex-state party chairman. I'm an ex-criminal defense attorney, and I'm an ex-baseball coach. I'll quit being nervous about every election I'm in the day after the election. And we're going to continue to do what we do. We're going to go out. We're going to spend as much time in as many communities as we can. And we're going to be honest with North Dakota people. I don't want this job bad enough to lie to keep it. I like the fact that people think I'm accessible. I like the fact that I answer questions directly. I try to do that. Sometimes it's not always popular, but we're going to go out, we're going to tell our message, because there are a lot of things coming down the pipe and that have come down the pipe in the last 2 years that are really, really bad for North Dakota. And it's time to go back, time to get back to DC and fight for them.
Depending on where these polls come from, do you tell me that you don't pay attention to them at this point, or
No,
you don't like what you hear, what you see?
What I say is we try and conduct them as accurately as possible. I'm doing them to try and get accurate data, trying to know where we're at, seeing how. I mean, this is how you do a campaign. I've been involved in them for a long time. There are far too many politicians that do polls to make them feel good about themselves. That's a good way to get in trouble. That's how I would advise other candidates when they were doing it. All I want, any poll is just a snapshot in time. That's all it is. And so when you have unique and different things happen throughout the course of a race, you go out, you conduct some information, you take that information, you treat it with a grain of salt, and you move forward.
I would like to respond. I would like to highlight that from the questions that I've heard that people have gotten, that these were push polls. So keeping that in mind as well. Also, to say that we're not really paying attention, but we're kind of paying attention, his first instinct was to release 3 polls that showed that he was leading by much more. But I want to highlight for people that think that this is the status quo, this is how North Dakota elections are always going to be. An incumbent should be much higher than 50%. And the fact that he's not is fairly telling. I also want to push back on working for the vote of North Dakotans. If you go to Representative Armstrong's website right now, I want all of you to do it. Go to his campaign website. It still hasn't been updated since his last race. If you go through that front page, it hasn't been updated, and I checked right before we were here. It is October 11th. And so to say that you are working to earn the votes of North Dakotans, you can't do something as simple as change your website. You weren't at the 4th of July parade. You're not, walking. I've seen Senator Hoeven out on the parades doing his own campaigning, working for that vote. I just think it's important that people see this transparency. It's easy to get up here and say, yes, I'm working for your vote, but look who's actually doing it. The person who has no party backing, who can't fund her own campaign, that's given up her job to do this, and who's doing this campaign completely on her own. Who is going to represent you? The person who hasn't updated their website and hasn't even bothered, or the person who's getting in this race to make sure that people have a voice?
2024, if we may. Former President Trump has not decided whether he's going to run again. Congressman Armstrong, would you support another campaign by President Trump?
If President Trump is the Republican nominee, yes, I will support him. And I think it's really, really important. And 65% of North Dakotans voted for him last time, and the current president called those 65% that did extremists and the biggest threat to democracy. That is the reality of the space we live in. That's where we're at right now. And this administration's war on fossil fuels, war on production agriculture, incredibly bad policies that have driven us to the highest level of inflation we've seen in 40 years. 13% increase on food, 17.1% increase across the board on construction projects. Dismantling what we are doing for domestic energy production and begging our foreign adversaries on the world stage not to decrease production or to continue to do those things are existential threats to the state, to the country, and to where we're going. So if President Trump is the nominee for the Republican Party, yes, I will be supporting him and I'll vote for him.
Do you believe he has any culpability or responsibility for January 6th?
Yes. I mean, politically, yeah. I mean, the reality
Did he
of...
encourage it? Did he encourage it, in your opinion, the insurrection?
No, and I think that's because I know a lot of different issues about this, about a lot of these people. You're starting to see it in the Oath Keepers trial right now, that we're planning this long before he had ever said anything publicly, and all of those different issues. And I think that's an important part by the January 6th committee. I didn't choose to be off it. Speaker Pelosi chose not to let Republicans put who they wanted on it. That is a functional and structural issue about how the U.S. House of Representatives works. I would have served on the committee. I would have done it. But they took the chair of the largest conference off of it. They took the ranking member who's going to be the chair of the Judiciary Committee off of it. They fundamentally changed the way D.C. works. And that is absolutely unacceptable under any circumstances. And after that happened, I completely agree with the position of Republicans to not participate in it. But more importantly, January 6th, however you feel about it, and I've watched everyone except about half of one, is about political culpability. My biggest complaint when we try and do this in D.C. is to try and turn Congress or the Senate or the House of Representatives into something it's not. And what it's not is a neutral fact finder. Never has been, never will be. Impeachment are political remedies. To say that you have an impartial jury in the U.S. Senate that's going to vote on impeachment, if I was actually a criminal lawyer, I'd get all 100 of them struck for cause. Let's be honest about what it is. The American people know this. We know all of those things. If you want to have political culpability, deal with it, deal with all of those different issues. But any kind of culpability, criminal or otherwise, needs to come through the justice system and not for a made-for-TV hearing. By the way, that canceled their last hearing solely because they were going to get pushed off of the news by a hurricane.
I would like to respond, if
ahead,
possible.
yes.
That answer just proves that he's a rubber stamp for the Republican Party. Whatever the party wants, he will do. President Trump played a role in January 6th. You watch the hearings, we see it, we see his interactions. He knew that this election was fair, and yet he tried to incite a riot. Representative Armstrong was approved to be on the committee. So to say that Nancy Pelosi took all the Republicans off is not true. If you go to his Twitter account, you will see the speech he gave. Kevin McCarthy stood right behind him, and he kept looking back at Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy kept nodding in this decision to not be part of the committee. He could have had a voice for North Dakotans, and he chose not to. Additionally, since then, he's talked about how this is a choreographed hearing in the House. Of course, parts of it have to be choreographed, because if it wasn't, then you'd be criticizing them for not being organized. So this is a hearing where you're bringing forward testimony. You're bringing forward people that let me remind you, blood was shed on January 6th. You were there. You know what it was like. Police officers died. And the fact that you have said that in 2024 you will vote for President Trump, you don't even know who the Democratic candidate is. I mean, that just proves that at the end of the day, it's not the people of North Dakota that are your top priority. It's your party. And it's making sure that at the end of the day, those R's continue to hold the majority.
Well, I would argue 65% of the people in North Dakota agree with me. But let's go back to what the institution is and it isn't. And I'm really proud of the 4 years I've served in the institution. Since January 6th, we have used it to isolate congressional offices from the public. We have used it as an excuse to put metal detectors on. We've used it as an excuse for Capitol Police to spy on any one of you who decides to come to the Capitol to visit me. Whether you're coming there to say I did a good job or you're coming there to yell at me, that is your right. The coolest thing about the U.S. Capitol is once you get there, you have freedom of movement. And to say that the majority, it isn't about taking my voice off the committee or Jim Jordan's voice off the committee or Jim Banks's voice off the committee. We make this about us far too often, and that's not the case. What it's about is allowing the majority to silence entire constituencies, and the one thing you have in the House, the one thing you have in the minority in the House, is that you have the right to populate your own committees. And when you go past that, then you completely ruin the nature of how that works. And so yes, once they decided they weren't going to allow my ranking member on Judiciary to serve on that committee and the leader of the North Dakota Republican Conference, I agree with the Republicans' decision. And it wasn't just Kevin McCarthy's decision, it was all of our decision. We were in the room, we were talking about it, we were dealing with it. I don't think you have a whole lot of different options to do. You have to stand up for what you have in the House. You have to.
He has just stated he agrees with the Republican decision. He's not making his own decisions. He could have stayed, and he chose not to. There are two Republicans who are on. There's still two Republicans who are on that committee. Republicans who are seeking truth, transparency, accountability. If this really is some choreographed routine, then you should have stayed. You should have been the voice who brings that truth and accountability, but you didn't. And it's because it was the Republican decision. It was not your decision solely on its own.
Congressman Armstrong has made it clear how he feels about the 2024 if President Trump, former President Trump, were to get into the race. You're running it as an independent. If Kamala Harris and President Biden were to come to you and say, should we run again, what would you say to them?
Say it's their decision. The election is still 2 years away. And so again, the fact that we have an incumbent who's already said who he's going to vote for when we don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 years, we don't know what the economy is going to be like. We don't know what decisions President Biden's going to be making. We don't know what the state of democracy is going to be in 2 years or where the war in Ukraine is either. So it's their decision. Like I said, I'm an independent. There's things I agree with Republicans, with Democrats. But if they want to run, they run, and we'll see who those candidates are. But we still have 2 years to make that decision.
I have one follow-up on the election, and this is to bring it to me going into the voting booth, or to anybody going into the voting booth. And I'll start with Congressman Armstrong. What do you think are the top three top-of-mind issues for a voter in 2022?
Inflation, the economy, and are protecting our natural resources in North Dakota, whether that's ag or energy. Inflation, workers, the economy, natural resources.
Cara?
I'd say inflation and workers' economy can be roped into one because they're not mutually exclusive. So first, inflation. Second is upholding our democracy, seeking truth, accountability, facts. And then the third is advocating for equal rights and to make sure that our women aren't being treated like second-class citizens and that the rights of citizens, including those in North Dakota, are not being taken away.
At this point, I guess we were also talking, this I guess kind of blends into what Dave just said, but there's a lot of developments that have occurred. I mean, they're always occurring, but recently there's been more. It's already an unpredictable midterm election, even less predictable in many ways. I could run down a whole list of things, concerns about fears of possible recession. That's on the rise, that worries about that. House Select Committee investigating the riot at the Capitol. It's expected to have a final report before Election Day. At least that's what we've heard. Might be changing, but what do you see happening out there?
Yeah, I would like to highlight, again, going back to the response that they canceled this hearing based on the hurricane and not having the prime time. It's because they want to make sure that American people can hear it, can see it, can view the evidence. So there are a lot of developments. I mean, a recession is very possible. Inflation is one of our key issues. The cost of childcare is also an issue. So there are so many things happening at all times. And that's why you need a leader who's going to be responsive to this, who's willing to come to the table to compromise, and who's not going to just do the Republican decision, but who's going to do the North Dakota decision.
Congressman?
Yeah, I think unfortunately both interest rates and gas prices are going to go up before the election. I hope I'm wrong. Interest rates is a different issue. The Fed is doing whatever they can. I hope I'm wrong. I want to run for an election, but I want to run for an election where it's not costing my farmers more money to buy fertilizer. I want to continue to do those things. I just think, unfortunately, these policies have continued to placate and get to a place. I've said it before, and as somebody who's been in both the ag and energy industry my entire life, this OPEC Plus decision was without a doubt the most predictable thing you could have ever seen coming down the pipe. And it's really, really unfortunate. And you know what? North Dakotans are really frustrated because if you're a wheat farmer and you see the cost of groceries going up, it's not going into your operation. It's just not. If you see the cost of a T-bone at a store, if you can find one that's double the price it was, it's not coming into your cattle operation. And if you're an unemployed pipeline worker and you're paying your utility bill in October and November, you're not interested on a nuanced policy about foreign versus domestic energy production, you're pretty angry. And that's, like I said, I think that's what's going to happen. I hope I'm wrong.
You're listening to live coverage of the North Dakota congressional debate with Republican Representative Kelly Armstrong seeking his third term and independent challenger Cara Mund. We will return shortly with closing statements on KFGO. Welcome back to this congressional debate on KFGO 790 AM, 94.1 FM, and 104.7, originating from the NDSU campus. We appreciate the university's help and cooperation with this debate. My name is Paul Juergens, the news director at KFGO. Reporter Don Haney from KFGO News and news director Dave Thompson of Prairie Public Radio in North Dakota. We've reached the time for the closing arguments. Each candidate has been allotted 2 minutes. We had a little coin flipped prior to the debate, and Congressman Armstrong will deliver the final closing statement, followed by independent candidate Cara.
Well, thank you all for hosting the debate. Thank you, NDSU. Good luck this weekend against South Dakota State University. And thanks to Cara. I mean, listen, outside of everything else, jumping into this stuff, most people after they take the bar exam, like try and take a couple weeks off. I know I did. I actually moved to Norway to go see about a girl, but it worked out. But so getting in this is always tough, and it really is. But the best way I can close this is talk to you about the last conversation I had with a Democratic colleague when we were coming out of an Energy and Commerce hearing before I came home for this. And, you know, I work really hard. I try to be respectful. I really like this particular person, but he looked at me and said, don't worry, we're going to transition your people away from the coal industry and all of that. But he could have been talking about the oil industry, could have been talking about the natural gas industry, and he could have been talking about production agriculture. And I don't usually get fired up, but I got pretty fired up. And I'll tell you why. And this is how I responded, and this is what I think is so important. I think this is what's at stake. I looked at him and I said, don't worry about my constituents. Don't. We're fine. We know how to make a living out of a tough, harsh landscape better than just about anybody else in the world. What I want to know is what you're going to tell your constituents. And he's like, what do you mean? I go, you're going to go home to your district and you're going to have to explain why they're paying $8 for a loaf of bread. You're going to have to go home and explain why they're paying $25 for a steak. And you're going to have to go home and tell them why they're paying $6.50 for a gallon of gas or $1,000 a month in a utility bill. The reality is they don't make a single thing in DC we need here, not one. But we produce a whole lot of things that not only DC needs, not the rest of the country needs, but the world needs. And it's something that we do, and it's the greatest privilege of my life. I go there every single day. I graduated from high school in Dickinson in 1995. There's 10 of us left, 10 of us around. There were no opportunities. There were none there. I got to speak at an Empower event in Bismarck yesterday. There's a class full of BSc kids there. Every single one of them, if they want, can make a life and a career in North Dakota. That wasn't always the case. That wasn't that long ago. And to say that we're going to listen to people who've never had dirt under their fingernails a day in our life, just make our lives a little bit harder and continue to do this. We've talked about daycare. We've talked about it at the state level. We've talked about it at the national level. You know what's really good daycare? If grandma can watch granddaughter, or if grandpa can watch grandson, and you see your family and you see your community and you see your lifelong friends more than at Christmas and Easter. So it's important, and the stakes are that high. And we're going to continue to move forward, and we're going to continue to fight for the things that are important to North Dakota. And I'll work with anybody if it's good for North Dakota, and I'll take on anybody if it's bad for North Dakota. And regardless of how you want to paint as extreme or anything else, I have 10 years of doing this. I've worked very hard. I've tackled really difficult issues, both at the state and the federal level, and I'll continue to do it because it's that important. Thank you all for having us. Thanks for putting on a great show. You guys always do a great job, and I appreciate the opportunity.
I'd also like to thank KFGO for doing this, for NDSU and Representative Armstrong as well. But there was a comment you made in our last debate that I didn't speak out about that I think is important to speak out about now. You said that as an independent, I would be the most ineffective member of Congress. And I want every young girl out there to know, don't ever let a man tell you that you're not going to be an effective leader as a strong, independent woman. Representative Armstrong could have sat on the January 6th committee, but he chose not to. He's part of a Republican study committee that's released anti-ag policies. He didn't speak out about it. He's now said that President Trump, without even knowing who the other candidate is who he's going to vote for 2024. Not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing what's happening in these hearings, not even knowing if President Trump is going to be an eligible candidate. He is a rubber stamp and a puppet for the Republican Party. He ranks 29th in the most missed votes in the U.S. House of Representatives. 29th out of 435. Think about who he's representing, and that's when he's even there. He's voted against veterans' health care with the PACT Act. He's voted against infant formula appropriations for our children. He most recently voted against mental health in our schools. He's voted against women in the reproductive rights. He's voted against the right to contraceptives. I'm the one candidate who doesn't have a party behind me. I'm not taking PACT money. I'm an independent, and I've earned my way here. I did that petition. I went around the state. I met with North Dakotans. I'm not just going to do what a party tells me. I'm going to put the people of North Dakota over a political party. And I will make sure that your voice is heard when it comes to upholding democracy, when it comes to upholding constitutional rights, and when it comes to making sure that North Dakotans are seen, are heard, and are valued. Thank you again.
That will wrap up today's debate. I want to thank both of our candidates for being here, to our KFGO News team, to Dave Thompson, and to the team at KFGO who made this possible. JJ Gordon, Eric Johnson, Madison Quinn, Josh Linus, Al Murray, all behind the scenes, making sure this is streamed at KFGO.com, on our Facebook page, and on the air on KFGO Radio. Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. However, absentee and mail balloting has already begun. Vote.nd.gov will give you all the information you need. I'm Amy Eiler. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's debate. Stay tuned for KFGO for more election coverage with Tyler Axness and Joel Heitkamp. And if you missed any of today's debate, you'll be able to find the stream of it and the podcast at KFGO.com. I'll turn it over to Tyler Axness and Joel Heitkamp for continued coverage of today's debate.